good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third Arlington Advocates for Restorative Justice Town Hall meeting. My name is Lauren Epstein, and I will be your moderator tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. I apologize for the technical difficulties. We had a little Zoom challenge. So if you're here, good for you for opening your email. So I want to introduce our guests from the Offender Aid and Restoration of Arlington, Alexandria, and Falls Church. We are excited to have restorative justice experts Elizabeth Jones Valderrama and Katy Steinbruck. OAR, so Offender Aid and Restoration, is also known as OAR. It's a community-based nonprofit which envisions a safe and thriving community where those impacted by the legal system enjoy equal civil and human rights. Among all of their great work, they offer alternative sentencing options through community service to youth and adults in order to avoid the trauma of incarceration and instead remain part of helping the community thrive. Let me introduce our guests. First, Elizabeth Jones Valderrama. She is the executive director of OAR and has been an integral member of the team for more than 15 years, where she is focused on implementing best practices and evidence-based models for OAR programs. And she has created a working environment where the staff quality, professionalism, and commitment grows, and new staff positions are added. Elizabeth moved with her family from Costa Rica to Arlington, where she graduated from Washington Liberty High School as the high school's first Hispanic Latina valedictorian. And she's a graduate of the Leadership Center for Excellence Leadership Arlington Signature Program, and was honored in 2014 as one of the 40 emerging community leaders under 40 in Arlington, and in 2019 in the city of Alexandria. She currently serves on the Alexandria Community Criminal Justice Board, the Alexandria Arlington Regional Workforce Council, the Arlington County Community Criminal Justice Board, and the Leadership Center for Excellence Board of Regents. So welcome, and I just got to say there was a lot more that I was supposed to read, but it was like there was a ton of stuff. So I apologize for shortening that, but she is quite a background. Also with us is Katy Steinbruck. She is the deputy director at OAR, and she has worked in various capacities, including as director of volunteer services, director of business development, director of reentry services, director of programs, and for the last 5 years as the organization's deputy director. She was born and raised in Alexandria, where she currently lives. As the daughter of Pastor John Steinbruck and Ernest Steinbruck, Katy has been involved in social justice and social service for a long time. She has a degree in psychology from Virginia Commonwealth University and a post-baccalaureate certificate in substance abuse rehabilitation counseling. And she's currently completing a clinical mental health counseling graduate program at Capella University. Tonight, our experts will do a deep dive on restorative justice. They'll answer your questions throughout the program. Please know that we are video recording, and this event will be posted on YouTube. By being part of this program, you're allowing us to share this with others and releasing your rights. You're welcome to enter your questions in the chat when we have times. Every so often, we'll be taking a break so that you can ask questions. We'll pause. Thank you for being here again, and let's begin. So Elizabeth, can you start us off and give us a brief overview of what OAR is doing today for restorative justice, and make sure you unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth. I'm excited to be here along with many friends, but especially also with my wonderful deputy director, Katy. So thank you again for having us. So OAR has been around. I wanted to just kind of give you some background since 1974. We've been doing work in the communities. We particularly work with Arlington, Alexandria, and City of Falls Church in various ways. One of the ways is in reentry, so assisting people who are currently incarcerated and also coming home with returning home, as well as their families and children. Our second way of working is, as Lauren mentioned earlier, our community service component, where we partner with the courts that are mostly in Arlington and City of Falls Church in the community to ensure that that folks are, instead of being incarcerated, get the opportunity to give back to the community by completing community hours, volunteer hours, and that's the actual sentence. So that's a very clear way of the beginnings of OAR around restorative justice and wholeness. And then our third area of our work, which is also incredibly important to us, is our anti-racism work. And so we really believe that the goal of the organization, we've been around since 1974. In 2024, we're going to be 50 years old. And my hope for OAR is that 50 years later, we do not exist anymore. And the reason why that would be is because of the work that we're doing with our anti-racism and racial justice journey, so that the community and those who are in the criminal legal system, from law enforcement to all the way down to incarceration, probation, et cetera, and reentry, will end mass incarceration by looking at racism and racial justice. So that's a brief kind of just overview of all that we do at OAR. We have 5 full-time team members who are fantastic, and we all kind of work in different areas. And so one piece of our restorative justice model, OAR was created under the idea of restorative justice. And I know that everybody here is familiar with that, but it's the reality that when, the way that we have seen it at OAR is that when a harm occurs, we have to find a way to make the community whole again. And that requires us to also include all parties in the conversation. And so one way that we have been doing restorative justice at OAR for a very long time, and how we originally started in the 1970s, was through this idea of community service. So when a person harms the community, instead of incarcerating, we partner again with the courts to offer this option as an alternative sentencing to go out and do volunteer work in the community. And that's kind of just a very quick, direct way of showing how restorative justice works here, in particular in Arlington County, as most of you want to know. So one example of our community service work, if for those of you who have gone to prior to the pandemic, the Arlington County Fair, for example, or the Blues Festival in Columbia Pike, or the cycling, I mean, lots of different elements. We've had several of our participants there to support that those events so that people can come back into the community and enjoy themselves. And so that's part of it. It also supports the participants in being able to get some additional skills that they may not have had previously, to stay home with their family, to stay home with in their school systems, in their careers, et cetera, and not really remove them from the community, which is incredibly traumatizing for all of us, for the whole community, particularly for the person, and incarcerate them instead. And so we're really proud of being in conversations about restorative justice. We are proud to be able to think through about if community service is not the right piece for this community, which I think there is a lot of conversation around whether community service in the way that we do it is as good as it could be leading towards restorative justice. And I think we're really open to that. So that's one of the pieces. And so I had asked our team member, Katy Steinbruck, to join us in the conversation for several reasons. One, she's amazing, and I think everybody should get to know her. But also because she has been doing a lot of work in the community service department, as well as in serving on the actual restorative justice community with Parissa and many others. And so I wanted to have her come through and speak on her experiences so far with the restorative Arlington component and all of that. So I'll turn it over to Katy.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So let's see. One of the things that's been interesting for me in terms of being part of the Restorative Arlington work group is that simultaneously, OAR has gone through, as most organizations have with the COVID pandemic, a severe decrease in donations, some budget shortfalls, some funders that felt that that couldn't maintain their commitment to us and for certain grants that we have. And so we had to reduce our staff significantly over the summer. And in that process, I supervised the director of the community service program, but then had to jump in and actually just do the community service program. We've slowly built out our team with volunteers and interns. But I really went, back to my roots and working with participants and working with them on community service and their community service obligations. And, so this question came up. I mean, there's so many things in terms of the conversations that I had, juxtaposed with the fact that I was in this Restorative Arlington work group that's looking at like, how can we implement restorative justice practices in the county? And we have at OAR often talked about community service as, if not a restorative justice program, to have the restorative justice spirit, in the sense that it's this idea of healing the break that the person has, the person that's committed harm has the break that they've made with the community. So
Can you give
in
an example?
example of some of the things people might have done in the community service program to have to do community service.
Yeah.
It's pretty, because for the community service program, you can either be sentenced or mandated to do community service hours, or you can do community service hours for court costs that were created as going through the process of the court system in Arlington. So we have a lot of variation in the types of charges of the people that we work with. But typically, if you're sentenced to community service, I would say the most common, if there are common things, perhaps what people would typically think of like property charges, some lower level drug charges. Yeah, I think that's pretty much for if you were just purely to get sentenced community service, it would be charges along those lines. But then we also have people that are returning to the community that want to work off their court costs that have any number of, they might have a felony charge, they might have been incarcerated for years, and now they're getting out and they want to work off their court costs. And so then they come to us and do community service. And each hour represents a certain amount of money. It's $15 for general district court, $20.91 for circuit court, and then the amount of you having court costs is then commuted to like the number of hours by that rate of pay. And so people can do like 100, 200, 300 hours, and it brings up a lot of questions. I think in being more at the ground level recently in doing this work, there's racial justice issues that come up. There's privilege, how privilege impacts your ability to complete your community service, your ability to connect with a place where you can do community service. I think it's very different to come from what might be, let's use for an example, like a middle-class background in Arlington. Maybe your parents know people that work in nonprofits or know people at the schools, and you can make this connection to doing that volunteer work pretty easily. Also the privilege of, transportation to get there. And, so I think what comes up when you don't come from privilege is that, and in the conversations that I've had with some people that are doing community services, that wasn't obvious to me, I think, when I wasn't interacting with people on a regular basis, was that there's, the intimidation factor in reaching out to an organization and saying like, hey, can I come to your organization? I have these community service hours that I received from the court and I need to work them off to do volunteer hours. Would it be okay? I mean, the response that I get when we do the intake process with people is like, you want me to reach out? You want me to what? Like, so I'm just going to call up this place and what am I supposed to say to them? And also the reality of it's very different for a privileged, young person from Arlington to call a place to say, hey, I've been mandated hours by the court and have to do community service, than maybe for somebody that doesn't come from privilege, or that is a Black, Indigenous person of color, where we already know that people kind of project criminalization onto them. And so this, so that even they've expressed that to me, that what are people going to say when I do I have to tell them my charge? What do I have to do? It's such a different conversation and experience. And so I think those are the things with the community service program, and that it's, in the restorative justice spirit, there's all these things that we don't think all the way through, and the way, and I know that that's.
But you do. So, but your program actually does think through these things.
No, I don't think we initially did. I think
Oh,
we're
okay.
starting to.
You're starting to now.
Part of me coming back down and the conversations that Elizabeth are having are just by virtue of the fact that I happen to be doing this at the ground level now. I don't know that people would have brought that up to me as deputy director or to Elizabeth as executive director. I think part of our spirit at OAR is to stay open to the realities of how even our programs impact people's lives. I think you can get caught up in, especially as leaders of nonprofits, you can get caught up in really, you're thumping for your organization and you want to say how wonderful your programs are, but we really want to understand how to be more effective in connecting with people that need our services, what those services are, and what's the real impact of those services. And I think for certain people, community service is a great option. And I think I think it lands very differently on people that don't come from privilege, for obvious reasons. But I don't think we really had those conversations. And so I think that's something we're starting to take a look at. And that really impacted the conversations that I know that I've been a part of with the Restorative Arlington Working Group. I think it's coming into this process. The thing I was really impressed, I'm in the legal working group as a part of Restorative Arlington. There's also a community group and a schools group. And I think the thing I've been most impressed with is, and the thing I was most concerned about, actually, when I first talked about being part of this group, my biggest concern was that we would not be looking at restorative justice through an anti-racism, pro-Black mindset. I think that was the biggest concern, because a lot of the restorative practices that I've observed and trained in and volunteered in over the years really came from, with the best of intent, from white culture, and it had a lot of white culture characteristics. And I think that what impressed me about this group and what I felt was different about the Restorative Arlington conversations right from the start is a very authentic grappling with how to embrace restorative justice as opposed to punitive, retributive justice, but in an honest way through an anti-racism, pro-Black mindset, to really look at the realities of how these programs are going to truly land on people.
Well, let's find out what folks, if there's anyone who has a question that you would like either Katy or Elizabeth to answer, just drop that in the chat and we'll have them answer that. Can you give some examples of using, reframing the racial justice lens in what you do and what that impact has or it intended to be?
Yeah, and I think we can both take pieces of this question. I think for sure. So our work with being an organization moving towards being an organization that's pro-Black and that uplifts, specifically Black, Indigenous people of color, and that is an anti-racist organization, allows us to look at every single element of our work. It allows us from a staffing perspective to figure out who's on the team, who should be on the team, who should not be on the team, in terms of shared experiences, who's on the board, who should, be added to the board, what decisions are being made and what mindset is being made in that sense, including our programs. So one thing we were sharing earlier prior to getting on is that we were talking specifically about whether we use virtual technology in the past, and we have been actually early adopters of virtual technology, because when we were looking at what barriers we as OAR were creating for participants in any of the programs, the fact that we were asking folks to come into the office, the fact that people had to take off from work, the fact that people had to find childcare, all those pieces to come in for an intake for any of the programs in person, transportation, all those different things. Is that was really not helpful. And so we actually began using virtual technology before the pandemic occurred, a year or so before to make sure that we were able to support participants and remove those barriers. So we were on video or on call and those kinds of things. I think another piece is the spirit of our team. We're really all about collectiveness, which is part of what Katy is talking about when we talk about like we're open to ensuring that this is a program, this is an organization for the people. It's not an organization that best suits us as team members or really donors or funders of the community. It's really the organization that suits the needs and meets the needs and empowers the needs and people's voices of the participants coming to the door. So we're a very different kind of organization than others. And so we don't, when questions about like if we consider ourselves specifically experts or if we consider that we're like at the at the highest piece of our work, I think the reality is that the experts are the people who are coming to the door. So OAR believes that the participants who are coming to the door are experts on themselves, and that we're there to support their expertise on themselves and support them in achieving their goals and not what we think of our own pieces. So it's a unique experience in that way. And I'm sure we have other pieces that we can tell you about. I know that there's some things that are coming through on the chat, and so I certainly can speak a little bit more to that. One of the pieces that has come through is, the discussion about, or the perception of the mistrust between police and the community. And so I think with good reason that communities who are Black, Indigenous people of color have been in places where they are not able to trust that let me just back up. Every single system is failing and designed to fail people of color. Every single system in this country, and we're talking about this country here, every single system in the United States of America is designed specifically to fail people of color and particularly Black people. So with that in mind, with all of us knowing that the systems have failed us, have failed people who are Black, Indigenous people of color, the law enforcement and courts and anything in the legal system, we don't even say criminal justice system, because there is no actual justice for Black, Indigenous people of color in those systems. We say the criminal legal system. And so with all of that happening in the criminal legal system to people, the impact that Black, Indigenous people of color have experienced, it's actually not surprising at all that there's mistrust with any of the systems, because that is, clearly they're failing. They're failing in lots of ways, including people are dying. People are literally getting shot down or choked or killed. And the faces that you're seeing are mostly people who are Black, Indigenous people of color, but primarily Black and brown men and women. And so I think that is something that's important. And so I think one thing again came through the chat, and I just want to clarify why we say Black, Indigenous, and people of color as opposed to overall people of color. So back in the day, about 5 years ago or so, the term POC, or people of color, came out. And the most recent piece that's coming is that we actually talk about it from the perspective of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So the reason why we pull out the Black, Indigenous component is because in terms of who has a target on their back, in terms of who's being failed mostly, it's the Black and brown people. So those are our Black and Indigenous people of color. Other people of color that don't fall into Black and brown folks certainly have their struggles and absolutely are being failed. But when you look at the actual racism in this specific country, it's anti-Blackness and anti-brownness, which is why we at OAR really want to make sure we always say Black, Indigenous people of color, and particularly that we are a pro-Black organization. And pro-Black means everybody.
What are some of the specific things that that citizens hear, right? So we have a bunch of people that are watching and will be watching this on YouTube. What can they be doing to bring racial justice to restorative justice and to the work that you do? Because primarily, just to encapsulate what you do, is that when people come out of incarceration, you make sure that their reentry is the best possible way of doing it. That they get employed, that they stay out of jail. So what can we do as citizens to support that?
Absolutely. And I want to say something, and then I'm going to turn it to Katie to come in to talk specifically about, like, as citizens, how can folks be on an anti-racist journey as it connects to restorative justice. I think one important thing when I talked about, in 50 years, we want OAR not to exist, is not just OAR. We want the structure of the nonprofit system to completely be different. Because one of the quotes that we often say to our in our minds and to each other is, charity is not the appropriate response to injustice. I think it's really important for people to understand that if nonprofits and the community and the government agencies and businesses, et cetera, are not doing anti-racism work, you're just throwing good money after bad, right? It's like the goal is you have to do anti-racism work to ensure that that things actually get to where they need to go, where there is liberation for everybody. And so even though we do really good work by making sure that when people come home, they are supported in their reentry journey, I think it is very important to say that we could do every possible thing. We could give transportation and housing and employment, and yet they're still returning to an incredibly racist community. So in terms of their reentry success, that plays a huge role. You can give, lots of different things, but that plays a really important role in it. And so now I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Katie for her thoughts.
Okay. Oh, so I think, the conversation about restorative justice obviously is nuanced. It's very layered. In terms of what we do and if it's restorative justice, I think we are looking as an organization at how we can support restorative justice initiatives. We're an organization that has traditionally been a direct services organization. We do support people as they come out from incarceration. We want to continue community with them while they're incarceration. So we provide groups and programs while people are incarcerated. We provide clinical mental health services while people are incarcerated. And we provide the same as they come home, along with having emergency services, things like providing smartphones, providing Metro fare, smart trip cards, keeping people's minutes on their phones, fare on their smart trip cards for the first couple of months that they're released, providing clothing, providing housing assistance, like all these myriads of needs that people have when they're released, because it's such a hemorrhaging experience to go through incarceration. People have to start their lives completely over. So traditionally, OAR that's a huge part of who we are. We're a direct services organization. We've also married that with a community service program, which arguably could be, we've seen it for sure as a restorative justice spirit. That's been the intent with which we conduct that program. I think the way it's landed on occasion could arguably be more punitive than restorative. And that's the conversation. It's part of why we really wanted to be part of and take an active role in the Restorative Arlington work group, is to understand that program more and how we can move it in a way so that it doesn't disproportionately negatively impact Black, Indigenous, people of color, and people that just don't come from privilege. And so, and then on top of that, as an organization, and some people I think have watched the upstream downstream video, we believed strongly. We've gone through a whole multiple year process, which we'd love to have that conversation with people that are interested, why we don't just do direct services work and program, we don't just focus on direct services programs. We have moved to upstream work and really want to address racism and white supremacist culture in our country, and how that how that specifically connects to our work, and that if we're not doing both, then we're part of the problem.
So I'm going to reframe the question. So I, as a citizen here in Arlington, how can I support what you're doing, or how can I reframe racism?
Yeah, so and I can just jump in just real quick, Katie, and then I'm gonna toss it to you. I think there's a couple of things, and Katie will certainly come through in just a second. I think one of the things in terms of supporting us as an organization, one of the pieces that we do is we have cohorts that we're doing, anti-racist and racial justice cohorts that we're doing. They're certainly on our website. They're 10-week cohorts that support people who are both WP, which is white people, and separates the cohorts from BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, so that we actually have deep conversations that are not going to traumatize each other. So I think the community going through those cohorts would be really helpful. Doing anti-racism work is really helpful in changing in those perspectives, lifting up voices of people of color and ensuring that people of color in leadership positions, and also have ensuring that we're looking at, like our policies and our things. It's really important for us to go out and vote and march and all those things. But in addition to that, we have to be clear on how we're working within our circle of influence. And what we have discovered is that most harm happens from a horizontal level, not from a vertical level. So people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color who are being harmed by their peers, their friends, their family, their supervisors, their coworkers, the community members. Yes, we have really interesting situations in the politic world, but the reality is that this right here, the circle of influence and the one that you have, really makes a big difference. But I'd like to turn it over to Katy for her perspective as well.
Yeah, I think in terms
But,
of
but Katy, before you go, because something you said, Elizabeth, that I'm a little familiar with, that you said that you have cohort programs. So people who are listening can register for a program. Is there a cost to that?
Yeah, there is. Sorry, Katy. There is. We have a link that we're happy to share now or later, but you can check out our website. It's oaronline.org. It's a 10-week cohort. We are recruiting right now for the January cohorts and for the April cohorts. And there is a cost, and the costs vary depending where you are in terms of who's paying. So if you're a community member versus a corporate person, we also allow we provide a scholarship by waiving tuition for anyone who is within the criminal legal system in any possible way. So police officers, sheriff's department, Commonwealth attorneys, public defenders, probation officers, all those folks actually go for free. So the people who pay to attend are helping with those
Sure, that's great. That's so fantastic. So in these cohorts, they go through programs where they have discussion groups and circles to kind of uncover their belief structures and see how they think about things in order to shift their perspectives.
Yeah.
And these are just regular citizens doing this to increase their awareness.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's all of us who need to do the different work, for sure, increase their awareness, but also to change the behaviors, right? So we believe, and one of the things that Katy has often said is, the work that we do at OAR when it comes to anti-racism work is a harm reduction program. Right now, if you are not an anti-racist white person, if you are not moving towards being an anti-racist white person, you are harming people. You are harming Black, Indigenous people of color. And so the goal is to reduce the harm that white people are doing every day, and that folks who are Black, Indigenous people of color who are conditioned to support, I guess, whiteness and to uphold white culture, to reduce the harm in that way. And so that is certainly why people are doing it, to change behavior, to gain their knowledge, and because they don't want to harm people anymore.
Cool. Well, that's a really good program. I haven't seen, I know we have someone who's been kind of communicating a bit, but is there any questions from the audience that you want to share with Elizabeth or Katy about their program, what OAR does to impact our community?
And in the meantime, I just wanted to, Lauren.
Yes, I had one question.
Any questions can go into the chat.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions.
Katy, that had an opportunity. I know I cut you off, Katy, so I was making sure you had an opportunity while.
Yeah, Katy, please.
Yes. So I think one of the things that I wanted to mention is just if in terms of the community and how the community can get involved, I for sure think that the best springboard place for getting involved in restorative justice is, and I agree completely with Elizabeth on this, is to start with anti-racism and racial justice work. That I think that then you will, as you start to learn about restorative justice practices, you will come to it in a way that can be more helpful to the community. So I think as a community member, if you're curious about restorative justice, having studied it my whole life, you know, that, and also having worked at OAR for the past 20 years, I would say like the most important thing is to start that process through anti-racism work, and to start that process by understanding what it means to be pro-Black, by understanding, because then you'll understand how restorative practices land. And I think that's a really, really important mindset within which to go into the work. And I think when we talk about restorative justice, what we're looking at our organization, you know, that's a process that centers around the harmed party, you know, so then it allows dialogue, it allows for accountability. These are very specific practices, things like doing conferencing, and that really brings parties together and allows for accountability, and it allows for people to really have to grapple with the harm that's been caused and to have that conversation. And so some of the criticism of restorative justice practice sometimes is that it tends to move the center towards the party that's committed harm. And so being as we're OAR, I think when I came in to this work, you know, both going through the understanding, working through anti-racism helped me in starting to take a look at, because, you know, my whole life has been working with the party that has committed harm in an incident, you know, as opposed to a party that's been harmed. And I think that that conversation is what we're really starting to have within this Restorative Arlington program. And how can we, as an organization, and community members hopefully will feel the same way, how can we start to support within the Arlington community developing practices that are going to allow for more restorative more restorative justice practices as opposed to punitive. And I think that.
So what's an example in your mind? What's a restorative justice, just to kind of bring it down to like the ground level? What are some restorative justice practices in the criminal level?
Absolutely, I can talk about that. And I'll just start by saying within the current criminal legal system, you ask 3 questions. You ask what law was broken, who broke it, and what punishment is deserved. Within the restorative justice practice, you ask who was harmed, what are their needs, whose obligation is it to meet those needs, who has a stake in this situation, what are the causes, and what is the appropriate process to involve stakeholders in an effort to put things right and address underlying causes. And I think that's really critical, is that, you know, what we have, it's really easy to detach from the process when you're going through the legal system. You know, what restorative justice does is it brings you into a circle. It's a dialogue. And people describe restorative practices, and a specific restorative justice practice that we've been looking at is conferencing. And that might be at different levels. It might be a diversion to do a conference with the harmed party and the party that's been harmed. And then within that process, they decide, you know, and that is something that gives agency to the party that's been harmed to be able to say what they feel would be the appropriate punishment, I guess, would be in more retributive terms, but what needs need to be met by the party that caused harm, and how would that happen? And what it does is it allows the harmed party to be a part of that conversation. And so, whereas the criticism of restorative justice is typically that, you know, it focuses more on the party that has caused harm, in reality, what it actually does is bring the party that's been harmed into the process and allows them to have a voice. And so one of the specific practices that we're looking at, or that we've studied within the Restorative Arlington Restorative Arlington work group, and to be fully transparent and clarify, we're looking at this with multiple organizations. You know, OAR, obviously our work really centers around this, so we want to be part of that conversation. But one of the specific practices that we are really supportive of is taking a look at conferencing and how that can be involved, and bringing people into, preparing people to come into a circle process, a dialogue. You know, so there's a lot of preparation beforehand, and then bringing in people to discuss the harm that's occurred, and how can that harm then be healed? And it really centers around the harmed party. And that's an extreme oversimplification of the process, and maybe not even the best description. So the community member, I would say there's really two areas, if this interests you at all, and it would be exciting to get involved in. It's both get involved in anti-racism, racial justice work, and then really start to learn about restorative justice practices and how you can support the group that is existing with Restorative Arlington as we start to move towards implementation, how to support us and become a part of us, in implementing these practices within the community, which hopefully, we're hoping Arlington's a place that can be supportive of restorative justice practices.
Cool.
Yeah, and also just to add on, invest in those practices, right?
Yes.
I think that's
What does that mean exactly?
It means donate. It means give money. I think that's an important piece.
Give money. We got to be specific. Give your money to OAR.
Sure. Give money to OAR. Give money to my cat agrees. Give money to a lot of other organizations that are doing this work. Organizations that are doing both social justice.
Like who?
OAR. www.oar.
You can. Katy can drop it into the chat. So the cat, does the cat also get money for restorative justice?
He gets money for everything. Yeah, and so those kinds of things, I think it's important to to look those up. There's organizations who are trying to move towards being both social justice and specifically around direct services as well.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't a lot of us. There's a few of us. There's some in DC area. I don't know that there's many in Arlington County that are doing both direct services and social justice. So I think it'll be tough to provide those, but we certainly can look into it and see. But I think for sure, one of the pieces that's really important is investing in this type of, of support with funds. Because even if OAR was to take on new conferencing, which we would definitely want to do, that requires some funds.
Sure. So I want to just see if anyone has any questions. We've had a very not a lot of questions this session, so I want to make sure that folks get their questions answered. Pop it into the chat as a question.
Lauren, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think Parissa had a comment.
Oh, Parissa had a comment. I didn't see a question. Parissa, go ahead. What's your?
I know this is OAR's presentation, and I don't want to take away from that, but I just want to echo what Katy said about bringing victims into the process. One of the things that I found in working with victims, and this was in innocence work, but even more so now as the Commonwealth's attorney, what I find is that they really sort of at some point come to believe that a certain number of years is going to bring them closure. And, I know from seeing people on the other side that it's not a specific sentence or, giving a victim witness statement necessarily that gives them closure. So it's really important to bring them into the conversations early and to really hear from them what they want. And, I can think of an instance where somebody came in and we had, like a 4-hour meeting with them. And the person came in and, at the beginning of the conversation, they wanted a certain number of years, which was a really long time. But then, sort of midway through the conversation, it really became clear what they wanted was a sense of security, their sense of security back, and to make sure the person didn't do it again. And we've sold this line about the system that if you get a certain number of years, you're going to feel better. And the fact of the matter is that they're not going to get their sense of security back, not for a really, really long time. And it doesn't matter whether this person does 1 year or 10 years in prison. But restorative justice actually opens up a space where they can, because they can hear why, they can talk about it, and they can express, sort of where their sense of insecurity comes from, and then hear from the person why this happened. Why did were they sort of chosen to be the victim of this crime? And so it actually opens up these spaces where people can then say, you know, this is what I need to heal. So they're opening up that the conversation, first of all, and then like, this is what's going to make me get my sense of security back. This is what's going to make me feel like I'm whole again, to the extent that anybody can be made whole after something, you know, a crime happens to them. But our system doesn't do that right now. And it breaks down because it doesn't do that. And so restorative justice is really just a place to, you know, to really see the humanness of not just the person who did the harm, but really the humanity of the person that was harmed too, in a way that the system doesn't do right now.
You know, that's a really great response. I think it really kind of melds well with what Elizabeth and Katy and the last two efforts that we've had, the last two guests shows, in that restorative justice is ambiguous, but it's ambiguous in that there's giving of room and space for new and innovative ideas and solutions that maybe even haven't been created to bring justice, to bring resolution to both parties, to everyone involved. And am I summarizing it okay? I feel like I'm getting my education here. Someone give me a, Parissa, am I in the ballpark?
I am not trying to take over this conversation. So
No, but did what I say, did I get it right? But you can go for it, because we're here because of you. So tell me, is that do I have it somewhat right?
Can you repeat it?
Well, so that the idea is that we're opening up the space of justice, right? The idea, the construct around justice that we have, to include more options, more possibilities, greater communication, greater awareness, innovation in solutions to have a better society.
Exactly. That is 100% correct.
Okay, so in that context, or in that construct, I think what OAR is trying to do is, in the frame of bringing people back into societies, making sure that when they come back that there is a really strong frame of anti-racism to their process and restorative justice to their process, so that they're also made whole. Do I have that right, Elizabeth?
Yeah, it's definitely about healing. It's definitely about love. And that's exactly what anti-racism work.
I just wanted to say that because, you know, I'm getting my education. I'm probably the least knowledgeable person here, but if I feel like if I can get it, then maybe other people can get it too. And that's really the point of what we're doing, folks. If you are listening, we're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. So get your questions in now. But we, and I say we, I mean me and a few other folks in Arlington, want you as Arlington residents to understand what restorative justice is, understand all the components. There's ambiguity, it's complicated. People are throwing in books like, white rage and white fragility, and white rage and white fragility. And there's lots of material to kind of start ingesting this as a way to expand and elevate our culture, right? Our society. Not, when I say culture, I mean all of us, the whole mishpacha, the whole thing. So are there any other questions before we kind of take any final comments from our guests? And Parissa, you're welcome to comment as well. Any other questions?
So I'm seeing that some books are coming through. Just wanted to make a comment and love that Parissa speaking. She's on our OAR board, so she's OAR too. So this is for you too. So I wanted to just make a comment about some of the books that are coming through to give some perspective. I think in terms of reading, we highly recommend Me and White Supremacy. Is written by a Black Indigenous person of color. And so we really like the way that person has written it. So Me and White Supremacy. And there's a lot of things you can work through on those, just like journaling and all those kinds of things, which is important. Another one that's really good, it's called So You Want to Talk About Race, which is also a really good book, written again by a Black Indigenous person of color.
You know what we'll do? If you want to send me a list of books, we'll put it in the YouTube link so that folks who watch this can go and get those.
Great. Those are the two that we highly recommend from OAR.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, Carissa, did you have any final comments? And then I'll go to Katie and then Elizabeth, and then we'll wrap up.
No, just I think thank you for your support, Lauren, and everybody who's in, and Kateri and Peter and all of the people who've done some really incredible work in getting the message out about restorative justice in this group, as well as with Restorative Arlington. But I love that you're reaching a population that is, you know, curious and open and excited about this. So thank you for that. And yeah, supporting RJ, you know, writing to the county board is you know, expressing that this is a thing that Arlington residents want is really important. And that's ultimately what is going to help get things funded. And of course, again, full disclosure, as Elizabeth said, I am a very recent addition to the OAR board, and they do amazing work. And I, you know, I'm just really excited to be, you know, working with them both on RJ and anti-racism and challenging race, which has always been, you know, one of the torchbearers in Arlington for bringing these things. I think, you know, if you know, the decades of work that have been done on this, you know, have brought Arlington to where we can actually be innovators. And I'm really excited to be a part of this. So thank you.
Cool, awesome. And actually, I'm going to give Katie the final response. A response from David Ansel's question: what are some specifics about anti-racism practices upon release of a prisoner and his or her reentry into society? This will be our closing statement.
So how anti-racism in relation to people returning to the community, I think for OAR, you know, we really thought we were doing a great job of welcoming people back home. And I think what we've learned in our commitment to anti-racism work and creating a pro-Black space is that we really had a lot that we had to change in terms of policy and in terms of just the environment, in terms of our own behaviors that we had to work through and to truly be a welcoming space that was coming from an anti-racist, pro-Black perspective, you know, mindset. And so in our experience, when we started to really grapple with that, what does that mean? What does that look like? What does that kind of space look like? What would that kind of culture be? When people walked into that, even as we just started to grapple with it, it was a palpable difference to that. They were like, what happened to OAR? What's going on? You know, that.
And what was the difference? What was the specific?
As we started to center around relationships with people coming through the door, we stopped seeing them.
So did it change the way people felt about it?
Experts on themselves, and we started to view the communities that they come from as having, you know, value, and that those communities are experts on themselves. We no longer were practicing as a nonprofit that was a gatekeeper and a colonizer. And I think, you know, there's a lot here. And as community members, if you're interested in learning, if you're interested in dialoguing, even if this sounds like, I don't agree with this, come talk with us. We want to be in dialogue with you. And I think these are really critical things, in the overlap between anti-racism and restorative justice brings, and to start dialogue around that is where the hope for Arlington lies. So.
I had one more question. I'm going to give this to Elizabeth, from Elizabeth. What are some of the specific changes that OAR made?
Hi, Elizabeth. Yes, lots of changes. Particularly, I think it's a lot to talk about, but I think for sure one of them is our staffing. We have actually ensured, we originally had like an 80% staff level when we first began the organization. When I first got there 15 years ago, we had a bunch of, we had 80%, and most of them were people who were white without any shared experience at all with the population that was coming through the door. And so we've changed that, and now we're 80% with more shared experience. And so that shared experience means experiencing racism on a daily basis. And shared experience also means connected, impacted in some way by the criminal legal system. So those are the folks who you're going to see who are staffed actually to be there to encourage and support and cheer on participants. So that's one thing. I think that also trickled down to changes in the board. We now have a much larger presence of Black, Indigenous people of color on our board, including officers' roles. We actually have 3 out of the 4 officer roles are actually Black, Indigenous people of color, which is unusual for nonprofits that are not only focused on racism, but also specifically on direct services. And we also just changed the way that we welcome people through the door. We have, when before the COVID-19 pandemic occurred, we had a puppy, a dog who would be there to welcome people. He was our ambassador of happiness, to support people in coming back home, to be there to bring joy for them as they're coming, from from incarceration. We also have taken care of ourselves, because I think that's another really important piece. Asking people of color, Black and Indigenous people of color, to do and be in spaces that are full of racism, including in Arlington County, it's incredibly weathering and painful and traumatizing. And so we know that as an organization, and we made sure that we moved into a place of health and wellness and healing for our team members and our participants. And so that involves having a therapist that we pay for on a weekly basis for our staff. That involves assisting in other health and wellness activities and contributing money for that. So those are additional pieces. We talked also about the transitioning to virtual and remote services. I think the other really big thing that occurred is that we stopped being, there's two more things and then I'll be ready. One is the ethical storytelling piece. We don't utilize our participants to go tell the story anymore of themselves. As you all know, we have a huge breakfast that happens and we have 600 people. And so people are standing there telling their story and suffering and re-traumatizing and re-triggering them. That was really unfortunate. And then lastly, I think one that's incredibly important to me is that we are just well aware of the weathering that occurs and also how difficult it is to survive in Northern Virginia if you don't have somewhat of a livable wage job. And so I think one of the big pieces for OAR that really, really makes me happy to work with this organization is that we don't make it hard for people to get the services they need. We don't ask them to provide 900 digits, paperwork, documentation, application, and your mom's information and your dog's vet in order to get you the money that you need to pay for your rent that day, or to pay for your medical bills, or to pay for your schooling. So what the big goal for OAR is to do cash and wealth transfer. So we really want to make sure that money is going not to the organization, but that the money that's coming in is going directly to the participants. That's one way that we're actually going to be able to help, particularly those that don't come from privilege and from wealth, to be able to survive in this community.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, Katy, Parissa. I want to thank you as my guests. I want to thank the team, the amazing production team of Katy Gajidhar and Philip DiMiglio. Philip is currently in Vermont. I think he is sanding wood, literally working on a wood table that he's building while we're talking. And Katy has been doing a great job with our social media. Please join us, help us out, because we want these videos out there. That's all we need. We're not looking for money. We have one more coming up in a week or so. And thank you all for being here, and do everything you can to learn about restorative justice, do everything you can to engage your neighbors in conversation about restorative justice. This is an opportunity for us to educate ourselves, expand our learning in our minds and how we are with each other. And with that, I wish you all a good night.